You'd have to be living under a rock not to realize that America isn't a financial issue. We've got a GDP, gross domestic product, of $30 trillion and a national debt of $35 trillion. And this gentleman is Mr. Fix-It. This is Scott Bessent. He is the Treasury Secretary appointed by President Donald Trump. And before we jump into this, and you're going to want to hear this because we're going to cover things like tariffs, we're going to cover DOGE, we're going to cover wages, incomes, all of that. But you need to know a little bit about Scott Bessent beforehand. He's a graduate from Yale University with a BA in political science. You're like, all right, well, that's not very impressive. It's not like Harvard or anything. I get that. But he switched over to finance, and then, this blows me away, worked for George Soros, the horrible, horrible human being that he is. From 2011 to 2015, he eventually became his chief investment officer. He left Soros, good for him, opened up Key Square Group. That was a hedge fund specializing in macro investments. So he's smart. He knows what he's doing. He's also served as an adjunct professor at Yale. He has a history of supporting both Democrats and Republicans. He supported Al Gore's president run strongly, also Donald Trump. He's a big advocate for tax reform, deregulation, and deficit reduction. That's why he's here. When this is over in just a couple minutes, you're going to know more about the solutions that are coming, more about what they're going to do, and more about what's happening to your money.
We don't have a revenue problem in this country. We have a spending problem. So we're going to get the spending under control. We're going to make President Trump's 2017 tax cuts permanent, and then we will both grow the revenue side, and we're going to cut expenses.
The president has said he doesn't want to touch entitlements, doesn't want to touch Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. He wants to increase, he wants to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. Where are you going to find all that money?
Well, look, if you change the growth trajectory, then there'll be plenty of money.
So you're at 3% roughly?
We're at 3%. The CBO, Brett, I've been in the investment business for 35 years. I'd always quote the CBO, but until I got to DC, I didn't really understand this crazy accounting they do. So whenever any of your audience sees the score and they says, oh, it's going to create this big deficit, CBO scoring just assumes 1.8% growth. If you increase taxes, you grow at 1.8%. If you do a big tax cut, it grows at 1.8%. It's not a real number.
So we should probably talk about what a CBO is, because I don't know about you. I had no clue what it is. This Congressional Budget Office, it's basically the U.S. government's fiscal or financial scorekeeper. Think of it like an accounting for the government. Their main job is to analyze how proposed laws and policies would affect the country's budget. Here's an example. If Congress is debating a new bill, say for health care or, in this case, tax cuts, which is coming pretty soon, they're going to turn to the CBO to figure it out. What's it going to cost? How will it affect the economy? Well, the CBO is supposed to do that. They give an estimate of the cost, they project future economic trends, and provide, preferably, unbiased information. Some of their shortcomings: predicting the future is tricky, and the CBO often uses what's called a static scoring, meaning it assumes that people won't change their mind after new laws are passed, which is, of course, not very true. If I had to give the CBO a score, I'd probably give them a score about 75%, meaning they're about 75% on point. This is my opinion. Remember, I'm more pretty than smart. Anyway, Secretary Bessent just said he's not a huge advocate for the CBO. More on that right now. Let's roll the tape.
How do tariffs factor into that? Do you plan to pay for things with tariffs coming in? And how does that factor into tariffs possibly being passed on to consumers?
Well, I talked about President Trump uses tariffs, unlike any president in modern times. And we think about it three ways. One can be revenues for the government. Two can be to make trade fair, because a lot of our trading partners do not treat us fairly. And three, President Trump uses them for negotiating, as he did with Colombia, as you're seeing with Mexico, with Canada, with the fentanyl crisis that we're having.
I'm going to pause it there for just a second, because he also is using this as a negotiating tactic. He's using and doing some amazing negotiations, which you're going to love, with what's going on in Ukraine. In fact, that's going to be the video playing at the end of this one. You might want to check that out. Sorry for the interruption. Let's get back to Secretary Bessent.
So there's a chance that the tariffs could bring in a substantial amount of revenue for the government. So, for instance, a 10% global tariff would bring in $2.5 trillion over 10 years.
But what would that mean for the consumer if you're fighting inflation at the same time?
Yeah, I think one of in what we're hearing and seeing, I think that very little of that would be passed on to the consumer. That I think the currency adjusts. I think that especially China, that the companies on the other side, the exporters, are going to eat a lot of the cost. And then three, I think for overall inflation, when we get energy prices down, when we deregulate, that as we saw in President Trump's first term, inflation is going to be under control at the Fed's target of 2%, probably less.
Y'all remember way back in 2017 when President Trump took office, all the opposition he had, the protests that were going on about him, how everybody was swamp rats and everybody was trying to stop him. And we still got the best economy we've ever seen. Well, the best economy we've had in 50 to 60 years, for sure. We're right there, but now we have the majority. And quite honestly, most of America is saying we want to get back to normalcy. We can do great things. Folks, this is an uplifting video. This is about wonderful things coming our way. I don't know about you, but I am so excited. I just touched on this. We're talking about inflation now. Let's let Secretary Bessent talk about this. This part is important for our well-being going forward.
One is, what is future inflation going to be? And then two, can we bring down this horrible inflation that we had over the past 4 years? The worst inflation in 40, 50 years. So I think if we get interest rates down, that will bring consumer prices down. If we can bring if we can deregulate, a big part of inflation is regulatory cost. And then most of all, can we get real wages up for working class Americans, which President Trump did incredibly successfully in his first term.
So we're bringing up a lot of President Trump's first term and all the success he had, but he didn't have Scott Bessent as the Treasury Secretary. He didn't have Pam Bondi. He didn't have Kash Patel. He didn't have Hegspeth. He didn't have so many of his people, his real partners here. He didn't have, God bless him, Elon Musk and what they're able to do with Doge. That's the next topic that we're going to cover. But I'm going to leave that to Brent Baer and Secretary Bessent. But first, Laura Ingraham, who I absolutely love, has something to share. But before she does, I want to ask you a question real quick. Do you know how many hours, days, and weeks, or whatever it is, a million seconds is? I'll give you a hint. It's 7 days, plus or minus. Now, here's the scary part. Do you know how many hours, days, weeks, or years a billion seconds is? 33 years. Keep that in mind when Laura starts talking.
It turns out in 2023, the Biden administration shelled out $10 billion to set up the welcome wagon for illegals. And in 2024, it was another $4 billion out of HHS. That's just HHS, by the way. But all of that is chicken feed compared to the other surprise the Doge crew found, a nearly untraceable budget line item payment of $4.7 trillion. What?
All right, if you happen to know how many years 1 trillion seconds is, put it in the comments. Put anything else in the comments. I promise you I'm going to answer them myself. And before we let Secretary Bessent hop in, I want to ask you a favor. If you're enjoying this kind of content, if this is feeling right for you, I'm pretty sure we're being shadow banned because we're relatively walking that fine line of going a little too far conservative. Do me a favor, hit the like and subscribe button. It would mean the world to me. And that means that I'm going to be able to get in front of you and give you more good stuff like this. You can also scan the QR code with your phone. Now, let's get back to Secretary Bessent.
Let's talk about Doge. How much money do you think really is going to come from this Doge effort? Well, first of all, let's start with, do we know how much money has come from it so far?
I think I saw an estimate today of about 50 billion. So that's a very good start. And I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we could have several percent of GDP that we are saving. That it's incredible to me. As you said, I've just been in the building a couple of weeks, but the 25% of the U.S. economy flows through Washington, D.C. And again, the waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think for the first time in my lifetime, we're going to see a proper accounting. And as the leading bond salesman for the United States, I got a pretty good story to tell that if we can do this cost cutting, if we can grow the economy, then President Trump is going to live up to all his promises.
So Secretary Bessent said several percentages of GDP, and I brought that up earlier on purpose. GDP was $30 trillion. Our debt was $35 trillion, but GDP $30 trillion. And when I think several, I'm thinking three. That is a $0.9 trillion savings annually. Okay. And if you cut the spending and actually start making money, You're going to pay down this debt, and there's a real opportunity for us to get completely out of debt, exactly like Argentina has done. This is the president of Argentina, and in 1 year, he has significantly restructured his government operations by eliminating over 200 state agencies in his first year. He had also, regarding his national debt, his administration has managed to achieve a budget surplus, which means money is coming in. Did everybody get that? Money's coming in. This is unheard of. It doesn't happen in government. Money goes out. This is the example we are following, and it is my belief that our president, President Donald J. Trump, will do the exact same thing. Now, don't go anywhere, because we sure do need to hear about what they shouldn't be doing. And this is really speaking directly to the Democrats. And I got a little bit of humor following up with this, and then we'll cut you loose. Let's let Ari Fleischer have his speak.
This is one of the biggest mistakes they can make. I mean, you talk about a hill they should not die on. The hill of government waste is not the hill for the Democrats to die on. But they want to pretend as if every federal program is meaningful, that every federal program serves its altruistic name and the cause it's supposed to be dedicated to, instead of being laced with waste, fraud, abuse, and just the constant year after year after year pile on that the bureaucrats do.
It is remarkable to me that the Democrats push back so hard. The liberals, really it's the liberals, not the Democrats. It's the liberal idiots out there that push back so hard against all this, but they're probably protecting something. Figure I'd leave you with a little humor. President John F. Kennedy. We choose to offend leftists with memes, not because it is easy, but because it is fun. Yeah, all right. So I grew up in Connecticut, but that's my best Boston accent. I'm Phil. This is Synopsis of Stupidity. Have an amazing day. God bless you. God bless America. God bless this country. We'll see you real soon. Watch this video. You're going to like it.